going on, everyone? Welcome back to the AVS team YouTube channel. My name is Matthew Webb. Today, we're going to go over shared VMDKs. And before I jump straight into it, I do want to give some context and to the relevancy. A lot of people are coming from different backgrounds. Some people have more of an Azure background or maybe a Microsoft background. And they may hear things like RDMs, database clustering, and shared VMDKs. And I want to kind of like wrap this all up with some history so you understand where this is all coming from, because it definitely is a challenge or something you need to solve for in moving users that may be on RDMs today on-prem into AVS. So sort of my point here, if you already know the background on this, these are chaptered out. So you can go to the configuration. The configuration doesn't take that long. So you can go ahead and jump ahead if you need to. So there's a lot of correlation with shared VMDKs and RDMs. So way back in the day in 5.0, RDMs were used because VMFS just simply didn't scale. The maximum VMDK size was around 2 terabytes. People wanted more than that. So really your only option was to use NFS data stores or you use raw device mappings. In more modern history, RDMs were almost exclusively used for database clustering because there was no real way to solve for that challenge. And so in database clustering or guest OS clustering, there's 2 types of clustering methods. So you have the shared cluster disks, and this is exactly what shared VMDKs are for in RDMs. And then you sort of have this shared nothing clustering. So things like always on availability groups or the DAGs. So I think there was a thought that everyone was going to go availability groups. A lot of people have, and it is a robust way of doing database clustering, but there are still some benefits, specifically from a storage space consideration, that you may want to do a clustered disk. So not everyone is necessarily going to do an availability group like seen on the right side of the screen here. With shared cluster disks, this actual disk that's used is either an RDM or a shared VMDK. On shared nothing clustering, what's actually happening is these are 2 separate virtual machines, and it's replicating an application level between those 2, but they're independent disks and they're not shared. So that is essentially what shared VMDKs are for, is to get rid of the requirement on these shared cluster disk solutions for RDMs. This feature came out, I believe, in 6.7. It was first in VMC on AWS. This feature works on VMFS and vSAN, which is relevant for AVS, since those are 2 storage types that you can run into. And the one thing to keep in mind is that there were some pretty heavy limitations early on, so there may be some hesitancy to use this feature in like 6.7 and 7.0. If you look at today's features on 8.0, and I will share the limitations document specifically for FCIs or Windows clustering, it is pretty much identical to the limitations of RDMs. So at this point, there really is no reason not to do shared VMDKs if you are going to stay on failover clustered instances or FCIs. If you're doing availability groups, this is not relevant to shared VMDKs. Those are independent virtual machines, and no RDMs or cluster disks are really at play, just clustered systems. Okay, with all that said, keep in mind that the shared VMDK feature is not only for Windows failover clustering, but it's also for things like Oracle RAC. And there may be some slight variances in the configuration for shared VMDKs on that. So refer to documentation. I know there's an Oracle RAC document and a Windows document around shared VMDKs. I will put that in the description below so you can review. But for example, there is a multi-writer flag that is specific to Oracle, not to Windows. So you do not want to check that box for that. So I'm going to go through the process of creating this like this is a Windows failover cluster. Double check documentation, make sure you meet the specifications of the specific application you're clustering for the shared VMDK usage, just to make sure you get it right. Cool. So let's jump into vCenter and see what this looks like to configure. All right, so in vCenter, the first thing we want to do is go to our first virtual machine that we're doing shared VMDKs on, and we're going to open up the edit settings section. The first thing we need to do is add our SCSI controller. The SCSI controller needs to be dedicated for the shared VMDK feature. So we're going to make it VMware Paravirtual and put SCSI bus sharing to physical. We need to save that first before we can add a disk to it, make sure that it updates. And then we're going to go back into that same screen. So we're going to go into edit settings. And here's where we're going to actually add our disk. Now we need to make sure that we use that new SCSI bus that we had. And we also need to make sure we have a couple other things checked. So we're going to put this as independent persistent disk. And then choose the SCSI controller that we just created. Once those changes have taken effect, we can go ahead and log into our operating system and look and make sure that we have a drive showing within Windows. So if we go in the disk management view, we can see our disk 4 is there. It's offline and unallocated, but we want to make sure it just shows up after a scan. So before we move on to the next step, we may have to make sure that we identify the name of the VMDK file of this new hard disk. So for this one, it's hard disk 5. And if I look under the disk file, I can see the exact name of it. This was actually pretty tricky because I had a bunch of VMDKs under my virtual machine that went all the way up to the number 6. But you notice there's no number behind this. So now I go into my other virtual machine and I'm going to open a hard disk. Now I'm going to scroll down to the original virtual machine and actually identify that file, which is the first one. So just make sure, even though it may be the 4th, 5th, 2nd, disk that you made, verify the disk file so you select the correct one. After I've done that, I made sure I chose the new SCSI controller that we created in the previous step, and the changes have taken effect. So we're completed on creating the shared VMDK. Now to verify that it's showing up in Windows, we're going to pop open the console and just hop into Windows and make sure that I can see this disk. And if I jump into disk management and scroll down a little bit, you'll see here under disk 4, we now have it. And that's all it takes. That's creating the shared VMDK feature within vCenter. That does not include the additional failover cluster instances you need to make within Windows to finish the configuration. So that's not included here. We're just focusing on the VMware steps. So if you have any ideas for a video, certainly send them my way, leave a comment below, and we'll see you on the next one.